are trying to put out one fire, but we're lighting another one in order to do that. And we need to look at the European Union member states that have led us into this crisis and still want to be leaders. It's not a matter of putting out fires. We need more intelligence and less ideology in this EU. Thank you.
Please.
In October, I said the 50 million Ukraine facility is a rushed, inadequate mechanism tailor-made for corruption and embezzlement of EU funds on a massive scale. This is still the case. Many findings and recommendations put forward in the June 2023 European Court of Auditors' opinion have been ignored. They found that persistent grant corruption and state capture posed a systemic risk for the Ukraine facility, so they called on the Commission to develop a strategic document on how to prevent and combat grant corruption and state capture. Where is it? We are taking billions from other parts of the EU budget, and there are no provisions to ensure that the funds don't end up with companies owned by the likes of Zelensky and the oligarchs close to him. The dogs in the street know that Ukraine is one of the most corrupt countries on earth. So why are basic anti-corruption standards being waived in the case of Ukraine? Wouldn't it make an awful lot more sense if we work for peace before we start pouring billions more into Ukraine? You're burning EU citizens' money. You are being irresponsible.
Thank you, Mr. Wallace. Next speaker is Mr. Ivan Vilibor Sinčić.
Thank you very much. The policy of the EPP, Liberals and the others is suicide. First, the lockdown ruined the EU economy. Then you tried to fix the holes by 750 billion euro. And then the 13 sanctions which are killing Europe and not doing anything to Russia. We are currently in the course of deindustrialization. Factories are closing, people are laid off, and our farmers are on the roads. So on the same day, we decide to send another 50 billion euro to Kiev. I do not want to give Croatian money for Zelensky's regime. And there is even talk that member states could take over the debt of Ukraine if Ukraine defaults. This is nonsense. We had a discussion yesterday on the European Central Bank, 8 billion euro debt, the biggest debt from the beginning of the bank. So, of course, what is this going to result in the elections? Of course, the Euroscepticism will win in most member states. This is clear.
Here is Mr. Carlo Ressler.
Hvala puno, potpredsjedniče, kolegice I kolege.
Thank you very much, dear colleagues. European continues to struggle with challenges that have serious consequences on our market. The world is unstable and unpredictable, and this all leads into question our long-term technological standing. The agreement on MFF is an attempt to strengthen European strategic economy and investments in the field of green technology, competitiveness, but also protection of borders and help to countries of Western Balkans. On the other hand, as we have heard in the previous speech, we see attempts to turn policy into cheap drama and not to take over responsibility. There is an attempt at fraud and a lack of common sense policies which Europe needs. And these are security, competitiveness, strengthening economy.
Forthcoming generations. And as European Parliament rapporteur for the budget, who has put forward changes for agriculture and resilience in other areas. There are many positive examples of the use of European finance. For example, the Bucharest government has used 96% of available funds for the last budget period, and we, with projects this time around worth more than 20 billion, we need to ensure that Ukraine doesn't lose the war. If Russia reaches the borders of Romania, the situation will be far more difficult. And quite frankly, the current cost would be as nothing in comparison with the price we would have to pay if Putin continues to advance towards us with no respect for human rights and international rules.
Ladies and gentlemen, I think it's important that we establish priorities here in this revision. That's why we need to redeploy cohesion funding to the new tasks that we now have to meet. And in this revision, that's what we've done. But I would like to pick up on a number of things that people have mentioned on Ukraine support. Colleague Joachim Kuhs from the AfD asked whether we've actually asked the Ukrainians if they want the money or not. Yes, we have. We don't even need to ask them. We hear that clear. It's just the AfD doesn't hear it because they go to Russia. They don't go to Ukraine. And Mr. Wallace said that we're extending the war. Well, if you're saying that, then what you mean is the following. This war can be finished very quickly by Russia winning. Yes, that could be done. You could end the war quickly if Russia wins. Or Russia could end the war very quickly by Putin pulling its troops out of Ukraine. That is the consequence. We as Europeans want a world in which the rule of law is strong, not the strength of might. Might is right is not what we want to support. The European Union was the answer we came up with to the Second World War, of free countries falling. So our answer here is clear. We stand shoulder to shoulder with the Ukrainians. We do not accept that bombs can move borders. Thank you. Mr. Damian Berzelager is the next speaker.
Colleagues, to the colleague from the AfD, I would also just invite him to maybe get on a plane from Brussels to Warsaw, take the bus across Poland, and then take the night train and get to Kiev. Because then he will understand how close this war is to us, and it is at our doorsteps. And then when you actually listen to the people there, you understand what it means to lose a brother or a father. And when you listen to Putin, really, you also understand that for him, Ukraine is just the beginning. He's talking about the lost lands of the Baltics and in Poland. So this, for him, is just the beginning. And therefore, I'm very proud that we agreed on the Ukraine facility, 50 billion euros, which is, I think, a huge sign of support so that Ukraine can pay its soldiers. I'm also happy that we have an SME quota in there to ensure that the rather centralized economy, post-Soviet war economy, can be further decentralized. But it's also clear this is just the beginning. We need to send all the weapons that we can send, including Taurus rockets. We need to ensure that our own house is cleaned up. We need to take the veto away from Orban and suspend the Hungarian presidency. And we need to work towards common procurement and a common European army under the control of this House. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Böselager. Next speaker is Ms. Isabella Elena Klotz.
Panie komisarzu, ten budżet mnie nie cieszy. To budżet Unii Europejskiej.
Commissioner, I'm not happy with this budget. It can be used to blackmail sovereign governments and is aimed at promoting those governments that just go along with what Brussels lays down. Poland's a clear example. 2 years after Russia's war of aggression began, the amount of aid provided to Poland is more than 3.5 billion euros, thanks to the previous government and under the current government. This government, which, as Mrs. Barley said, Brussels has decided to cut off the funds to. And it's astonishing that you could talk about re-establishing the rule of law. It would appear that this situation is too much for the European Commission. We need to be up to the situation, not so cynical. You have lost all credibility, not just in the eyes of farmers. You will soon lose power as well.
Geht's weiter mit Frau Cornelia Ernst.
Now, Ms. Cornelia Ernst. In December 2022, the Commission President spoke of a common European investment policy with a common European financing to establish a sovereignty fund in the framework of the revision of the MFF. And you'd think, well, not too bad. And then in 2023, that seemed to have disappeared. And instead of that, weak step policy, we need a genuine European policy.
This country. So this is crazy. Croatia already in 92. Is it important to have democratic elections in Ukraine now so that Ukrainian people can say whether they want to continue the war or whether they want peace? And if they want war, who will lead them in this war? We have to limit our funds and support if such elections do not take place in Ukraine.
Niklas Herbst.
The next speaker is Niklas Herbst.
Vielen Dank, Herr Präsident.
Thank you, President, Commissioner. I'd like to thank everybody who's contributed to finding a solution. This is absolutely essential. Back in March, in fact, we want to be able to disperse the first monies. This is absolutely urgent, but let's not kid ourselves. It's to contribute to state building. We're going to need far more than that, and we're going to have to deliver more than just warm words, like in Paris, and deliver in genuine military sense. And I think if we look back at what we proposed as Parliament a few months ago, you could ask whether the glass is half empty or half full. Well, I think dealing with the crises and security and defence, we haven't posted as high a level of ambition as we would have liked, nor the Commission. I think we'll see that we'll bump up against our ceilings again. And the Member States would have liked them to be even lower. But I think we need to be proud in Parliament that we've, in a crossbench fashion, come up with a tool to make sure that we have contributed to a solution being found. And that Putin's friends in Council have been immobilised, and I think it's thanks to the European Parliament that's been achieved. Thank you, Mr. Herbst. The next speaker is Ms. Viola van Kramon-Taubal.
Vielen Dank, Herr Präsident.
Thank you, President, Commissioner, Representative of the Council, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I'd like to thank everybody who has made this facility and the result of the facility possible. For Ukraine, this is essential for their survival. This is a survival measure. Let's not forget that the people in Ukraine, those people who are fighting on the borders, they depend on us to a degree. They know full well that if aid from Europe and maybe from the US were to dry up, they would no longer have a chance of winning. And that's why it's so important that we send this signal to Ukraine, but also to Russia, to Putin, to say we're standing side by side with Ukrainians. What's also important is we have a facility that is very well underpinned in democracy, monitoring, scrutiny. Of course, we want to make sure that our citizens in the EU are being shown that it's not a question of it doesn't matter where the money's going to. No, it's important that we can follow every cent that's being dedicated to this fund, and also that we can work in confidence with civil society in Ukraine and everybody who's interested in a democratic development of Ukraine. And please have faith in us. Rest assured that the money is going to the right places in Ukraine. Thank you very much. The next speaker is Alexander Vondra.
So, ladies and gentlemen, this European Ukraine facility is a very important instrument, and we should support it because it helps Ukraine economically to survive. And we should take also in our minds one fact, that it's not enough. We need to support more in the other area, which is vitally important, not just for security and defense of Ukraine, but for the security and defense of all of us. And that's our support in delivering what we have promised, but where we are lacking behind. And that's the support in armor deliveries, in the guns. Yes, yesterday there was an important meeting in Paris, and I would love to thank to those who invited the European leaders, like President Macron, and those who actively participated and brought the new initiative into the game, like my own Czech government. But it's not about the declaration, it's about the deeds, and we should do more in the area of our military support.
Thank you, Mr. Vondra. Next speaker is Ms. Ana Collado Jiménez.
Gracias, presidente. Buenos días.
Thank you very much, President. Good morning. Today we are assessing our recent past, but to talk about the future. And assessing the MFF entails saying that we don't have the right autonomy. We weren't independent enough from the member states. And there are three key issues today which will still be key for the future: industrial competitiveness, energy sovereignty, and the fight against climate change. This revision will help us use common sense and budgetary responsibility to deal with this. It will also help us bolster our geostrategic role and move towards common defense and allow us to support Ukraine, its reconstruction. There have been various revisions, but this isn't just one more revision. It's also because the take-up rate of the MFF, including the Recovery and Resilience Plan, have an impact on allocating resources. We have to think positive. In other words, those member states that achieve the targets and implement this won't run the risk of losing part of their allocations. It would be better for citizens to know how efficiently our taxes are used.
Lina Galvez Muñoz.
Gracias, presidente.
Thank you, President. One important aspect of the review of the MFF is the STEP platform, which is an instrument to develop our industry that produces key technologies that are essential for the green and digital transitions in the Union, and also for our strategic autonomy. We socialists support this proposal as it's a good test for a future sovereign fund, which should be used to help us to improve our technology and our competitiveness. But this incentive of having European funds available should be made contingent upon social aspects, such as the creation of jobs, which is something we socialists have always stressed. The projects to which these funds are devoted should have account for two key criteria. Firstly, territorial cohesion, and secondly, these social aspects, including gender equality. Only if we go that way will we begin building a better form of Europe. Thank you.
Alves Munoz. Next speaker is Ms. Rosa D'Amato.
Grazie, Presidente. STEP.
Thank you very much, President. STEP. This regulation should have given us a vision of European industrial policy and put fresh money into this in order to develop into strategic technologies. STEP also means a step forward. It's also about shifting from fossil fuels to CCS and so on by harnessing cohesion funds. It's about health, education, sustainable public transport, and investing in SMEs in less developed regions. That is what it should have been about. But now it's about taking money that would have helped the most vulnerable to big capital. These companies are making profits at with those who need the money not getting it. Now, we can't say that this is okay because it's better than nothing. We need better economic governance. But instead of that, we have accounting games at the expense of citizens.
Speaker is Mr. Krzysztof Brescia.
Thank you, dear Mr. Dear colleagues. Już za chwilę głosować będziemy nad tym bardzo ważnym.
Thank you very much. We're going to be voting soon on this very important report. And it's not just millions of Ukrainians who are waiting for the results of the vote, but many millions of European citizens as well, because the European citizens are well aware that Russia's attack on Ukraine basically is an attack on European values. The Ukrainians have spilt their blood, and now they're having to defend post-imperialist invasion. They're defending ourselves against the autocracy of the Kremlin for centuries now in Central and Eastern Europe. So it's important to support Ukrainians and to provide proper, genuine support for Kiev for the period of 2021 to 2028. We have the 50 billion in this report, the Resilience and Recovery and Resilience Fund, and also money's going to help small and medium-sized enterprises. This sum of money will allow also to block Russian assets, to use those assets then that have been frozen in the future. Russia has to be clearly the one that is accountable for this. And the frozen assets from Russia should be used to rebuild and reconstruct Ukraine. And that would be an important measure to be taken. And it's an important message for all of us. And it's not just showing solidarity between Brussels and Ukraine. It's also a strategic step for peace in our continent. So I hope that this report will be supported by this House. It's morally essential for the European Union and for Ukraine.
Mr. Marcos Rossempere.
Gracias.
Thank you very much, President. This is a red letter day. One step towards revising the MFF, a vital prerequisite for adopting the Ukraine facility. 50 billion euro of financial support between now and 2027, a fund that will focus on recovery, reconstruction and modernization. Ukraine's reconstruction has to be sustainable and inclusive. And this facility will allow Ukraine to move forward with regional policy and structural instrument coordination. We're giving a green light to STEP, Strategic Technologies for Europe platform, and by doing that, we're taking an important step towards the strategic autonomy we've been clamoring for the EU. A sovereignty fund that will allow for the existing fund programs to dovetail with others, as well as cohesion policy and other sources of EU funding. We need a cohesion policy that is fit for purpose and that will help us deal with future crises.
And the next speaker is our colleague, Mr. Dan Nitsa.
Mulțumesc, domnule președinte.
Thank you, President. Amazing news for Europe's industry, which has had many difficulties with energy supplies and following upon Russia's attack on Ukraine. There are sectors such as steel, the steel sector in Romania, which has had a very hard time, and we now have provisions to ensure that in Romania we can take steps to support investment and the operation of undertakings which are essential for Romania's economy. And it's also a matter of financing reconstruction of Ukraine, which we hope will be able to start soon. So it's a matter of supporting industries which make a contribution to our decarbonization strategy in Europe, and it's also making it possible for us to decarbonize certain sectors, making, for example, steel or aluminium, so as to prevent these forms of production being moved outside the EU. These are sectors which bring prosperity and economic growth and value added, which are things which all of the citizens of Europe expect from us. For Romania, for my country, and indeed for my city of Galați, this is excellent news, and I hope that everybody is pleased.
Thank you very much. That brings us to the Catch the Eye procedure, and we'll start with... I have to say, colleagues who have already had speaking time will not be able to take the floor under Catch the Eye once more. We'll start with Mr. Manders and then Ms. Grappini. Thank you very much, President. I've heard the speakers in the debate this morning talking about the revision of the MFF, the multi-annual financial framework, and it's good that we should vote in favour, but I haven't heard anybody mention anything about the savings that need to be made in the budget. I'm pleased that both the Commission and the Council are here. I drafted a resolution for preventive health. In each year, there are 300 billion that are spent on circulatory and health and heart health. And of course, a change in lifestyle is very important to help this. And I would call on colleagues to sign this resolution so that in a future programme, the Commission can prioritise these sort of issues, and that would allow us to save lots of money for other objectives. Thank you, Ms. Grappini, and then Mr. Koutsas will be after that.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Madam President, Commissioner, ladies and gentlemen. This is a first step towards revising the MFF. I was a bit skeptical because at the end of your presentation, Commissioner, you talked about competitiveness from the point of view of the internal market. But it's not normal to whittle down funds that contribute to social cohesion, competitiveness, and reindustrialization, because we are laggards. We lag behind other parts of the world, and we have to maintain cohesion and geographical balance. The European Commission has put forward a set of proposals. The European Parliament has improved this, and then the Council just knocks everything down. And this just fragments the internal market. We have to take decisions that benefit citizens. If there's no industry here, there won't be jobs. And if there's no competitive industry, we won't have decent wages.
Thank you, Mr. Koutsas now, and then Mr. Pimenta Lopes afterwards.
Thank you very much. I believe we are doing a lot to support Ukraine in economic, budgetary and military terms. Nevertheless, the needs of Ukraine are not defined by us, but by Russia, which is conducting an aggressive war against Ukraine. During the months that we have been discussing the Ukraine facility, Russia intensified the destruction of the Ukrainian economy and basic infrastructure. Russian occupying forces advanced further in Ukraine. The USA stopped supporting Ukraine due to the political confrontation between Republicans and Democrats. Finally, according to President Zelensky, the EU is falling behind in fulfilling some of its obligations towards Ukraine. Now is the time to strengthen our resolve and support Ukraine promptly and in an even larger scale than we are discussing. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now, Mr. Pimenta Lopes, and then Mr. Kelly.
Thank you, President. This revision means more than 74 million euros that have been decided upon not to make a good response to the problems faced by workers and by peoples, but determined by very contradictory forms of self-interest. Essentially, it is more money for the military, for militarism, and for extending the war, with all of the serious consequences this has for peoples, and other negative effects on, for example, cohesion and structural funds. And this will make our existing difficulties worse and will accentuate the divergence among countries. In the face of this, the peoples would want different options regarding our budget, contributing to national development, contributing to improving living conditions and diminishing inequalities, more investment in those countries that have existing productive deficits, improvement of public services, defending the environment and climate, decreasing inequalities among regions, promoting peace and cooperation. That's what we need to do, and that's what you are still not doing.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kelly now, and then Mr. Kohut.
It's one thing to have a plan, it's another thing to implement it, and if things change, you have to adjust it. And that's what we are talking about today. And things have changed. Obviously, the war in Ukraine, and I agree completely with the Ukrainian facility. We should pass it unanimously if possible, because it's not just the finance, it's also the moral support. And when you've been attacked, moral support is hugely important, and especially now that the USA, unfortunately, is dithering. Secondly, we have climate change and the Green Deal. The Green Deal has to be implemented. It needs a lot of resources so that nobody is left behind and we have a just transition. And thirdly, competitiveness. We have lost competitiveness in Europe. And if you're not competitive, you're not at the races. We need to get back into the race, and not just into the race, we need to be the head of the field. And that is hugely important, and if we can do that, everything else will flow from it.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kohut now, and then Ms. Bolke.
Jeżeli natychmiast nie wyślemy broni do...
If we weren't to send arms to Kiev now, then there would be no instrument left for reconstruction of Ukraine, because Ukraine would no longer exist. If Kiev falls, then the next target would be Vienna, Berlin or Bratislava. Let's be under no illusion. Of course, there wouldn't be more reconstruction, there'd be more destruction, more murder, more deportation. Let's not forget that Russia is an empire of evil, and Ukrainians are losing their blood, spilling their blood for the safety of Europe. So let's look at President Pavel or Minister Sikorski, who's fighting now to provide support from the US. Weapon provisions will help Ukraine, otherwise your children will be soldiers. Mr. Bouteng to wind this up.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. L'Europe.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Europe, with the complicity of the Belgian government, keeps harping on about the fact that we don't have money. We don't have money for pensions, health, education. On the contrary, we're being told that in the future, Belgium is going to have to save money. They're going to have to cut the budget to the tune of 30 billion euro. People are barely making ends meet at the moment. What about taxing billionaires? There seems to be a lack of will there. What about the lack of will of windfall tax? And here we're talking about the 50 billion euro for Ukraine. So there is money. There is going to be money until 2027. So why is it that we're finding money for Ukraine and for the war, but when it comes to workers, oh, it's too complicated. Oh, it's not going to work. And here the right and others are applauding. Slap on a windfall tax, invest in peace. Thank you.
Thank you. Now for the Commission, Commissioner Hahn.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for this debate, and once again, thank you for this strong support concerning Ukraine. I think we all together can be proud about what will be voted very soon. Why? Because when the Commission proposed 8 months ago in June last year this Ukraine support package of 50 billion, there was immediately a very positive reaction by Member States and the majority of this House. There was no debate that Ukraine needs the money. Why? Because Ukraine is fighting also for us, and it's about defending our rule-based world order. It's about their territorial sovereignty. And if we don't stop, so to say, this thinking that one can invade and can use his power to violate the territorial integrity of a country, then Ukraine is now, and others might be the next ones. And this is why it is so important to support them. And by the way, there was never an issue that Ukraine doesn't need the money. Quite the opposite. Urgently, there's an urgent need to get the money, because what we are contributing monthly is around 1/3 of the monthly costs of the state to keep the state up and running and to provide the necessary financial means. And I think we can also be proud because there will be an overwhelming majority in this House. You are not forced to desperately search for each vote like it is the case in the House of Representatives in the US. 26 member states have immediately reacted positively, and the last one followed. So we can be satisfied in a way that at the end of the day there was a unanimous decision in the Council, and there will be an overwhelming decision here in the House. And this is an expression how Europe stands at the side of Ukraine. And it's also important as a signal to other partners, allies in the world, not only to the US, but also Japan, UK and others, you name it, that we are ready to provide the necessary financial means in a multi-annual perspective. And this is what we have achieved and what we have done. Number one. Number two, a lot of debate has taken place today also on STEP. I think here we also should not underestimate the achievements we have achieved during the discussions and negotiations on the regulatory side. Of course, I also would have liked to get more money, fresh money, but it's always a kind of compromise. But what we have achieved, and this will pay off in the future, and I'm pretty sure significantly, is the so to say, the streamlining of different programs which are now applicable, so to say, for STEP. And this will be certainly an indication how the future could look like, the next MFF, less programs, better accessibility for final beneficiaries, and at the end of the day, a faster use and absorption of available support by European Union. And this will further contribute to more competitiveness on the European side. But of course, a lot has to be done also by member states, but also by the private sector. Here, more and better cooperation is needed, but I think STEP can really serve as a first step into the right direction. So once again, thank you for the debates in the past, for preparing everything for today, and I think you are ready to vote, and once again, thank you in advance for the strong support here in the House to, in particular, the Ukraine facility.
Herzlichen Dank.
Thank you very much. For the Council, State Secretary Michel.
Madame la Présidente, honorables parlementaires.
President, members of the Commission, dear members of Parliament, of course I wish to thank you for this debate and for the way you're committed and have worked hard on this issue. The timeframes were very tight, and I would underscore that this is a major step forward that we can be proud of. Some people have deplored and spoken against some of the decisions made. I would like to make certain points. Within this reviewed MFF, research continues to be a priority, not just for the European Parliament, but also for member states. I would point out that under the current MFF, the Horizon programme has been strengthened with 5.4 billion euros for Next Generation EU. And this agreement is a balanced one. In this review, all sectors have been called upon to make a contribution to the new priorities, including research. I'm really convinced that the outcome is a very positive one if you have regard for the difficulties that we faced in the course of the negotiations. As to the STEP programme, as we've underscored several times, the competitiveness of our industries is a priority for us in Europe. But we are facing challenges, and the funds available are limited. We should, in the light of this review, be able to take stock of the decisions we made and make any further reviews. And thanks also to the provisions of this MFF, we will be able to provide long-term sustainable support for Ukraine. And there will be a certain degree of flexibility to adapt payments in the light of needs, and to concentrate these payments at the beginning of the period, or to give extraordinary amounts at a later amount if necessary. This agreement also makes it possible for us to free up sums for our security, migration, foreign challenges, and the emergency aid and support fund. So, in a word, we are sending a very clear message with this review of the MFF to our friends in Ukraine and elsewhere. Thank you.
Thank you. Now to finish the debate, we have the rapporteurs. Mr. Olbrycht is first.
Madam President, Commissioner, Minister, this debate has always showed very clearly what is going on in the European Parliament. Because of the changes in the budget, we have a very clear presentation of anti-Europeans and pro-Europeans, even the pacifists who are now becoming pro-Russians. So I think this is quite a typical situation. But the big majority is on the very clear mainstream and very, very pro-democratic. Of course, what showed this debate and, of course, the whole work is that this kind of timing, because of the chantage, blackmailing, is absolutely unacceptable, because the Parliament is pushed to the wall and cannot any space of manoeuvre. So this was absolutely unacceptable. And we know very well what are the critical and negative elements of the result. But when you compare the positive and negative, I mean, there are much more positive elements which now happened with the MFF. I would like to say that we know very well that the budget is not big enough, is not prepared to face the new challenges. This is very clear, is not flexible. But still, thanks to the work of the European Commission, and I would like also to thank the Belgian presidency for a very constructive way that we pushed to the wall, we managed to finalise and to find a compromise. I would like to also to thank my co-rapporteur, Madam Margarete Marques, and also our staff, very competent professionals who helped us in the whole process. Thank you very much.
Herzlichen Dank.
Thank you very much. Ms. Marques.
Muito obrigada, Senhora Presidente.
Thank you very much, President, Secretary of State, Commissioner. Yes, what's been agreed is not ideal to meet all of the aspirations of our citizens. We know that the confidence of our citizens depends on this, and in many cases we had to choose in the way in which the EU would distribute its funds among policies and among priorities. And we need to be consistent with our policies for today and for the future. We couldn't not strengthen our strategic autonomy or support our fair and green transitions. We couldn't not ensure that we would increase cohesion or support our populations or enhance the capacity for the EU to defend itself in the current context. We couldn't do any of that without the resources, the funds that these things require. It's urgent that we should start setting up a capacity for investment in the EU after 2026, after the next generation EU. It's urgent that we start working on a new architecture for the European Union's budget, which would be appropriate and allow the EU to receive or to welcome new member states. And lastly, none of this will be done unless we respect the commitments and the interinstitutional agreement when it comes to financing these new challenges. It's a matter of approving new financial resources. We have a clear calendar. All we need to do is respect this, and putting new funds into the EU's budget is a matter of urgency. And lastly, I'd like to thank the co-rapporteur, Jan Olbrycht, and all of the teams who provided support for us through this long process. And also thanks to the Presidency and to the Commission for the scope that they've provided for us to review the multi-annual financial framework of the EU for the first time in such a way that we can reply immediately to new challenges. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Gahler. Madam President, ladies and gentlemen, I'd just like to remind you why we need this 50 billion that we're spending for Ukraine, because Ukraine is part of Europe, because Ukrainians have defended us, and the Ukrainian spirit will strengthen the EU as well. It ascribes the values that we aspire to. It's not promoting Ukrainian creativity and dynamism, but also European creativity and dynamism. It opens access to new resources and creates opportunities for new commonalities. But let's not forget, Ukrainians are paying the highest price: deaths, injuries, traumatized civilians, private wealth being destroyed. It's not just a question of helping for as long as it takes, but whatever it takes. With this facility, we want to help municipal self-autonomy and help finance to strengthen that. Our European experience shows that it works best in freedom. Freedom is promoted through democracy and the rule of law and is ensured by that. Democracy needs representatives of the people at all levels, and unrestricted and untrammeled free media. Parliamentarians have to be able to travel, exchange views, get a view of what's going on the ground. And that's why I'd criticise the undemocratic travel ban on the ban on travel for Rada members. But it's not just a question of strengthening municipal governance, but also civil society and the mechanisms of monitoring the use of funding. That's something that European Union citizens expect of us, and the Ukrainians expect of their own government. We are convinced that this funding is going in the right place. Ukraine will be stronger as a result of it, and we too. And I hope we'll find ways and means to take frozen Russian assets and confiscate them. Russia has to pay for its crimes. Occupanti demoi, slava Ukraini.
Thank you.
The next speaker is Ms. Gaditha Balrubial.
Thank you very much, Madam President. So this brings us to the end of the debate of three key files. The first proper and genuine MFF revision with more money for our programs. The Ukraine facility is the second one. We have a structured plan to help Ukraine resist and win. And then STEP, that is that first little stone that will contribute towards strategic autonomy. 3 committees, many shadows, 3 rapporteurs, huge teams backing us. I think we've really worked hand in glove. We've worked hard to improve the proposals, and honestly, I think we've achieved this. I firmly believe that these negotiations and agreements will be backed overwhelmingly. And in the case of Ukraine, looking forward to the fact that the money will get to them in a few days' time. But of course, this isn't the end. As soon as we give the green light to this, we have to start thinking about the next proposals. We have to start thinking about how we're going to design the next MFF and the next fiscal capacity. We don't have to wait until the Draghi report, which of course we're going to read with great interest, but we need hundreds of billions of euro if we want Europe to be competitive, to have an edge over everyone else, if we want to be at the same level as China and the US. We're talking about almost an annual recovery plan when it comes to if you look at it from a money point of view. We have to look at how we will design these plans, how they will dovetail with the MFF starting in 2028. But we can't wait until 2028 in order to push forward these capabilities. And then we're going to have to see how we're going to fund all of this. We have the issue of own resources behind the recovery plan. We're going to have to continue hunting for resources where we have the most big companies, big capital, and so on. If we don't do this, we're going to end up being laggards, and we can't afford that.
Als nächstes spricht der Kollege Fernandes.
Next speaker is Mr. Fernandes.
Muito obrigado, Senhora Presidente.
Thank you very much, President. The Strategic Technologies for Europe platform is going to make it possible for us to finance strategic technologies. This is an opportunity that we must not waste. All companies are eligible, but small and medium-sized enterprises receive particular attention. Competencies need to be used and improved, and STEP will assist with that. We also need to, we have the obligation to improve wages and to attract talents in the European Union. Member states gain flexibility, which can be done through the integration and resilience plans. They can use 6% of their national amounts when it comes to sharing nationally and Invest EU. This means that they can use the funds in specific areas to these goals. Furthermore, we face the duty to prevent European funds being used by companies based in third countries, for example, Chinese companies. President, it would be the last straw if these funds were to be used to companies that decrease our strategic independence rather than enhancing it. And lastly, to Council, I always have to say this, you, Council, have 40 billion euros on the table pending making a decision on 40 billion paid by the citizens in taxes. Why not use those funds? Why not increase these funds also, for example, with a tax on financial transactions? We don't want to, we can't allow national selfishness. Make the right decision, Council. We need an enhanced budget. We need this for the sake of cohesion and sustainability in the European Union. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Bushoi is the final speaker.
Dear colleagues, I think it was a very interesting and constructive debate. Competition for global technological dominance is raging, especially for control over the fundamental technologies of the 21st century, such as artificial intelligence, 5G, semiconductors, green technologies, and biotechnologies. And many of the major economies have put specific schemes in place to support their net zero and digital industries, and we are very much incentivized and inspired by IRA, the instrument of our strategic ally, United States of America. So this was an example that we should act as soon as possible. Therefore, our European industrial policy requires common European funding, and STEP and Net Zero Industry Act is the right step in this direction. Of course, due to the cuts, to the necessary cuts in the MFF revision, some of the discussion turned into a discussion around structural funds. We need to find solutions also for the EU for Health program and others, but do not forget that STEP is a platform that combines existing and new financial instruments to channel funding towards the development of manufacturing of strategic technologies. Parliament once again was very successful in getting the complete alignment between NZIA and STEP, covering all technologies and all supply chains, prioritizing those strategic projects that will strengthen the competitiveness. And competitiveness and new industrial deal will be extremely important and topical for the near future and for the coming years. The keywords for STEP are innovative and cutting-edge technologies to power innovative technology solutions and give European Union companies the support they really need to unleash their potential while transforming the Union. Thank you so much.
Vielen Dank. Die gemeinsame Aussprache ist.
Thank you very much. That brings this joint debate to a close. The votes will take place today. Next item on our agenda is Ms. Karima Deli's report on driving licences. I'd like to ask the rapporteur, Ms. Deli, to take the floor first of all. You have the floor, madam.
Vous avez la parole, là?
You have the floor.
Vous avez la parole.
Mes chers collègues,
Dear colleagues, one person dead on the roads is always one person too many dead. It's always a drama that could have been avoided. You will have understood that I don't think that we can accept any deaths on the road. These things are not predestined. Europe can't accept them. In the European Parliament, we have agreed a roadmap which is binding and is clear. 0 deaths and 0 seriously injured on our roads by 2050. Currently, we have 20,000 people dying each year on the roads of the European Union and more than 170,000 people injured every year. But then do the math. How many lives are destroyed? How many families are broken apart? We need to have a driving license which is at the service of road safety. This is what motivates us. We can strengthen security on our roads through common sense measures. The idea of this directive, the goal of it is to save lives. That's the only thing that inspires us. We need to make progress down this road with the driving license arrangements. But we know about this. But many of us have been down this way before because there are 14 member states, a majority that have already adopted Portugal, Spain, Italy, Czech Republic, Greece, Netherlands, Denmark, Finland, Belgium, Hungary, Lithuania, have all adopted the obligatory medical examination already. I should say this loud and clear here. A majority of member states already have obligatory medical tests. You can look elsewhere, but even elsewhere they do the same. Argentina, Switzerland, many other countries in the world require these medical tests. And we're putting forward the idea of these tests that will take place throughout people's lifetimes. Health problems can occur at any stage. It's not just old people that may have problems. It's a very simple thing. It's like having a second safety belt. Our Parliament has sent a historic message in the face of these unacceptable dramas on the roads. And I can tell you that in my experience as a member of the European Parliament, I've never received so much support, so many messages, so many moving messages of people who've had awful experiences. Any one of us tomorrow, in a split second, could have a serious accident and join the list of victims. I've received a number of messages. Here are some. Pauline is with us here today. Became paraplegic after being hit by a 90-year-old driver. Pauline has converted her misfortune into a struggle to make legislation successful in this area. Florine, 27 years old, also here in the Hemicycle today. Thank you. Ferren lost her mother, Jacqueline, 3 months ago, who was knocked over by a driver who without a doubt, was not fit to drive. And there are doctors who see people, there are drivers who see the effects and who shouldn't be driving and still do. Yannick is a heavy an HGV driver in France, just checked on every 5 years. Doesn't see why that should not be applicable across the EU. Yanni, who had to take the car keys from her grandmother 10 years ago because she was scared. I'll stop the list there, dear colleagues. I have received many such testimonies. But these are people who are willing to tackle the taboo, to raise their voices because they know what's at stake. So I say to you, we must legislate, because if we do not, you can be condemned tomorrow for failure to assist people who are potentially in danger, failure to provide assistance. We can do it. We can say loud and strong, dear colleagues, the European Parliament can legislate on this.
Now for the Commission, Vice President Suica.
Chair, honourable members, on behalf of my colleague Commissioner Vălean, who cannot participate in this debate due to other institutional commitments, I would like to thank Chair Karima Delli, the shadow rapporteurs and the rest of the committee for their quick and constructive work on our proposal to update the driving licence directive. This is a historic piece of legislation. If adopted, this will be the fourth such directive since the original ones adopted in 1980. Today, we are so used to the fact that we can drive across the European Union with one driving license that it seems difficult to imagine when driving licenses were not automatically recognized between member states. Since 1980, we have gathered countless best practices, closed loopholes, implemented important reforms, and adapted to a changing world. The revision again improves what we already have. It does not seek to reinvent the wheel, and I would ask you not to support amendments that could hamper the elements which work well and are the basis of the well-established system. Amendments to definitions and minimum age requirements currently in force fall into this category. These are especially important for categories B and B1. I would also like to remind you that introducing the concept of demerit points to the directive is problematic, as this would likely prove to be technically challenging to implement, considering there is no harmonization of road traffic offences and penalties at the European level. Moreover, the merit point schemes where these are used vary significantly from one member state to another. I would ask you to instead focus on issues on which we put attention when drafting the proposal. One concerns the accompanying driver scheme in the European Union. We are proposing that it should be open to 17 years old for licence categories B and C, as we wish to build on the positive results seen in the member states that already have such a system. We now want to make the scheme mandatory. Anything less will cancel out the positive impact on road safety, and it will also diminish its contribution to tackling the current shortage of professional drivers. I want to remind you once again that the road freight sector had around 400,000 unfilled positions at the last count. I would also ask for your support for our proposal to raise the minimum standards used to ensure fitness to drive. This applies to all drivers, regardless of age. Today, Member States have no mechanism in place to ensure that Category A and B licence holders are medically fit when they renew their licence, 15, 30, 45 years, or even longer after it was issued. We want to make clear that all drivers who are fit to drive should be allowed to do so. However, holding a driving licence is not only about entitlements, it is also about responsibilities. Between 5% and 15% of all traffic accidents can be attributed to the driver's medical fitness. I want to remind that the Commission chose to include in its proposal the possibility to do a self-assessment, which we still believe to be viable and proportionate on our way forward. I would urge you to support amendments that uphold our level of ambition so that we can help citizens understand when it is safe to drive. And finally, I'd like to thank you for your support on the probationary period for novice drivers, the European Union digital driving licence, the new system for the exchange of third country driving licences, and the easing of language requirements for driving licence applicants living in Member States other than their own. Each of these measures is key to ensuring that the fourth Driving Licence Directive achieves its goal: greater road safety and facilitation of the free movement within the European Union. I look forward to this interesting debate and to the adoption of your report, which I'm certain it will help improve the safety on our roads and will offer more opportunities for our citizens wanting to exercise the right to free movement. Thank you.
Vielen Dank.
Thank you very much. For the EPP group now, Ms. Łukacijewska. Thank you very much, Madam President, Madam Commissioner, ladies and gentlemen. The Driving Licence Directive was adopted almost unanimously. 20 out of 22 voted in favour, and in fact there were 21 against, so it was very controversial. But we, as representatives of the citizens in Europe, in the Parliament, have a job to do to try and make these things easier, to cut red tape, and I think that's a reaction to the requirements and needs and possibilities. We need to get rid of existing barriers and increase safety, and that was my watchword. On behalf of the EPP group, I was working on this issue. I think what we managed to get in the committee is improved on many issues to reject some of the more controversial issues and meet some of the expectations, for example, like the introduction of the digital driving licence or a driving licence for EU citizens can get certificates that then would be valid across the whole union territory where driving licences are issued. So if somebody's lost or had their licence stolen. But as a group, we cannot accept obligatory medical controls, especially if this would be exclusively down to age and not objective health issues, and if this is the only way to see whether somebody is fit to drive or not. Very obviously, we support the recognition of different systems in the EU, in the member states that work and are efficient. Having a penalty point system across Europe, the subsidiarity principle has to apply. We support the proposals that allow people to work on the labour market as lorry drivers, and of course there need to be well-defined conditions for that. Ladies and gentlemen, I think with the vote on this, we'll be able to get rid of unacceptable proposals and we'll be able to simplify, improve, we'll be able to increase the number of lorry drivers and ease things for younger drivers. I'd like to express a vote of thanks for the cooperation, and I hope we have a good vote on this, because European citizens expect it, and I don't want our vote to lead to younger people, any people, being turned away from the European Union as we should be opening doors for those who are in favour, not against the EU. The next speaker for the S&D group is Mr. Variati.
Grazie, Presidente.
Thank you very much. The report on the revision of the directive on driving licenses aims to have EU harmonization for driving license as much as possible, such as novice driver measures and the digital driving license measures. We know that the most controversial issue is mandatory medical checkups. I think that this is vital if we're going to have high road safety. Physical state, fitness of a driver will be assessed by a professional. I know that in some member states this doesn't take place and that medical checkups are replaced with self-assessment or self-certification. But I think that the precautionary principle is something that we should apply as lawmakers. We need to think about high levels of road safety. Site tests are extremely important because it's self-assessment isn't enough for you to know whether you've got vision problems. And all of this confirms the Transport Committee position. We have to send out a loud message, a historic message in favor of more road safety. Thank you.
Thank you very much. For the Renew Group, Mr. Riquet.
Madam President, dear colleagues, the European Parliament will vote tomorrow on a very important text aimed at improving road safety in Europe, more specifically the revision of the Directive on Driving Licenses. This text contains a controversial but necessary measure, which I want to say more about: the introduction of a compulsory medical examination every 15 years at the time of renewal of the licence in order to test the physical and mental conditions of drivers, since this is necessary. This regular examination has already been introduced in several countries. It is not intended to penalise drivers, but rather to protect us all using public areas. It's not an attack on the driving licence. After all, how could we justify the idea that our vehicles have to undergo regular roadworthiness tests, whereas the drivers are never checked upon? It's not a matter of attacking people's mobility, but of ensuring safe mobility. Like seat belts, safety belts a few decades ago, medical tests are one of those battles that we would rather not have to debate, because they're so obvious. To those who criticise the fact that Europe is intervening on the subject of driving licences, let me remind them that we really need to resolve this area. And I would lastly call upon you, as members of Parliament, I would remind you that we have the opportunity to improve safety conditions for all of the public, and we will be responsible here for all lives that are saved or lost.
Thank you very much. For the Green Group, Ms. Stepanee-Grunberg.
Sehr geehrte Frau Vorsitzende.
Madam President, ladies and gentlemen, dear Karima, Europe is growing together, and we are making the European driving licence something that will work in the future. Obviously, our vision zero is to have 0 people killed by 2050 on the streets, and to increase road safety, we've taken best practice from different member states and are now partially making this applicable across Europe. In Germany, for example, accompanied driving, which is something that I'm allowed to do with my children, contributes to the fact that novice drivers learn how to drive better. In Spain, the health checks that are infamous to when you're renewing your driving license is something that is improving safety and security. And we will like to see this every 15 years here. We're looking forward to an EU-wide digital license as well. I think there's still some details that are left up to the member states, obviously, but we're certainly looking forward to the negotiations at trilogue level. And we have to have our objective as Vision Zero for 2050 in the back of our minds, because it's about road safety and having fewer deaths in the future. Thank you.
Danke sehr.
Thank you. On behalf of the ECR Group, now Mr. Lundgren, speaking from his chair.
Thank you.
As a former lorry driver and member of the European Parliament, I'm extremely proud to be able to give you the benefit of my experience in improving the sector. Back in 2018, we had measures about improving training and practical steps to improve the B category license for 4,800 kilo vehicles and snow chain driving, and also alerts to false and fake driving licenses. That's reduced deaths on the roads in Europe, and these are things that we can be proud over. At the beginning, I had all sorts of fears about this revision of this directive, when the proposal seemed only to serve to attack young drivers in SUVs as having a specific SUV driving license, maximum 90-kilometre speed limit for novice drivers. But luckily, we managed to shift focus onto road safety during the negotiations, and this produced a very good result, which also shows how useful practical experience can be in the political decision-making process. Thank you.
Dankeschön.
Thank you. For the ID Group, Mr. Campomenozzi.
Grazie, Presidente. Thank you very much, President. Thank you, Commissioner. At this point in the parliamentary term, maybe it wasn't the right moment to talk about this, because there are some political groups that are exploiting this. There are splits across the House, within the groups, and my group is split as well, so my position might not reflect my group's. This is extremely important. Road safety is very important. If you talk to the parents of road accident victims, we know that the situation is extremely urgent. I know that the directive is controversial, but the time had come to overhaul the rules. Then, at the end of parliamentary work, intense parliamentary work, we achieved a good level of harmonization, because we've been given the opportunity to improve training and education and first aid training as well. And there's another important element, and that is to be able to get a driving license for heavy goods vehicles. And then, of course, on physical fitness of drivers. I think we have to go beyond self-assessment, because the reality on the ground is very different, especially when the issue is linked to health and age. Accompanied driving now. We looked at the experience of member states that were ahead of the pack, and we've managed to look at limits, which of course would have an impact on rural areas. And then, of course, driving under the influence. We're taking a zero-tolerance approach. I think that beyond what grabbed the headlines in the newspaper, if you actually take a look at the text, this is a sound one, a robust one, and it really will help with road safety. Thank you.
Dankeschön. Für die
Thank you very much. For the left group now, Ms. Kuntura.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Madam Commissioner, every week 400 citizens lose their lives, and almost every household will experience a tragedy linked to road accidents. The revision of the directive means that 17-year-olds will be driving huge lorries that might be 40 tons, and there'll be youngsters driving buses and coaches with young women, children, and so on. The minimum age of 18 shows that young lorry drivers are more likely to cause road accidents and road fatalities. It is our obligation to legislate in a way that will reduce serious injuries and deaths, the injuries and deaths that take place every day on our roads. So how can we allow driving licenses to be issued without a medical certificate, without eyesight tests? How can we not have regular medical checkups after a certain age? How can we do that, especially when certain individuals have serious underlying illnesses? How can we allow the issuance of driving licenses for motorbikes without anyone been practicing before that? I'm afraid we're not serving Vision Zero for zero deaths stemming from road accidents. This cannot become a reality if we do this. So please vote in favor of my amendments, and let's throw out the amendments I mentioned before that serve certain interests and make our roads more dangerous. Please vote in favor of my amendments so we can save human lives. Thank you.
Als fraktionsloser Abgeordneter spricht.
Thank you very much. Mr. Fururi now as a non-attached member.
Grazie, Presidente.
Thank you very much, President. European harmonization in the era of driving licenses is something that we can share because it's about Vision Zero, about having zero road deaths by 2050. More than 20,000 people lost their lives on the roads last year. We're talking about unacceptable numbers that we've got to reduce with more stringent rules and better prevention. That is why we support the proposal to have road safety training and also teach first aid to novice drivers that could come in handy when we have serious accidents. We also need to have zero tolerance for novice drivers driving under the influence of drugs or alcohol. I think if we do that, there will be less accidents involving young people. This is extremely important because road accidents are the main cause of death for young people between 16 and 20. We really have to focus on this. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm going to be a bit stricter with the speaking time now. Mr. Giesecke.
Vielen Dank, Frau Fitz.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. Well, just as I'm starting, you said you have to be more stricter. No, it's always the way when the round of first speakers is the case. Yes, 1 minute's not a long time. Yes, for the driving license is very important for young people in rural areas. It means freedom, it means meeting friends, going on a holiday or just getting to work. Also, the driving license would be valid outside Germany, and the driving license directive has been a story of success for added value for every one of us. Greens, the left and Social Democrats seem to want to change this. I can't really understand why they want to do this. Having obligatory tests, medical tests for everybody, no EU-wide recognition of accompanied driving for young drivers. These aren't going to help. Actually, it's much less likely for people to have an accident if they start driving at 17 rather than 18. So let's stop taking away decisions from people themselves. Let's have an EU recognition of Europe-wide accompanied driving. Let's work out driving licenses for tractors as well. Thank you for the extra 10 seconds you gave me. My pleasure. Now, Ms. Garcia Munoz.
Gracias, Presidenta, Vicepresidenta.
Thank you, President, Vice President. Road safety is about eliminating or reducing risk factors so as to minimize the road accidents and their fatal results. We want to achieve the goal of zero deaths on the roads by 2050 in the EU, but the fact is that more than 20,000 people dying on our roads every year. This review of the directive on driving licenses is essential with regard to our goal, and that's why we need to put forward measures that will help to improve road safety. That's the goal. Bringing down the minimum age for driving is not in favour of improving safety. Our aptitudes change over the periods of life, and that's why it may be important to have medical checks periodically, and also zero tolerance with regard to drink driving. These are important positive factors. Thanks to these factors, Spain is one of the leaders when it comes to low accident figures. Let's be responsible and not endanger one single further life. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It seems our Spanish colleagues can speak much quicker than others. Thank you to the interpreters. Mr. Urchin is the next speaker.
President.
Thank you very much, President, ladies and gentlemen. It's seldom that a draft report from the European Parliament has given rise to such attention. Ms. Deli from the Greens. Bans on novice drivers driving at night, accompanied driving. These are things that are no longer in the position of the Transport Committee's paper, and it's good, I think. One of the sticking points is medical tests, obligatory medical tests for all drivers. For us as Renew, it is pretending that you're helping safety. If you have a test when you're 18 and you then have to have one every 15 years, do we really think, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to improve road safety by doing that? No, we're not going to do that. We're just going to make sure that millions of more visits to doctors have to be carried out and additional bureaucracy will be brought to bear. We think that the current system that is in effect in the member states is the right one. It should be decided on the ground. That's how it works. It works in the member states, and I don't think there's any reason to introduce an obligatory test for everybody, especially because there are certain illnesses across Europe that would work.
Thank you very much. Mr. Zlotowski is next.
Geehrte Frau Präsidentin,
Madam President.
Wszystkim nam zależy na.
It is important to all of us to make traveling in Europe by car or by truck be comfortable and safe. We also want to be effective in encouraging young drivers for transporting all kinds of goods. So amending this directive is a good opportunity to achieve both of these objectives. However, it does not mean that we should agree to imposing new administrative burdens that can lead to discrimination because of age. Member states should act in accordance with the subsidiarity principle, so they should choose these tools that they deem appropriate to test their drivers. So harmonization that goes too far will be costly and ineffective. For many people, their car is the only means of transport that will make them independent. Drivers right now bear a huge cost of the climate policy of the EU, so we should not impose additional burdens. Thank you.
Dankeschön. Nächster Redner ist der Kollege Haider. Thank you very much. Mr. Haider is next.
Glücklicherweise ist jetzt
the draft put to the vote on the new driving licence, unfortunately, has been significantly watered down from Mrs. Deli of the Greens proposal. However, it's worth looking back at the original Greens proposal because it's symptomatic of the Greens and the left in general. First of all, the Greens wanted the success model of the age 17 driving licence to be scrapped. It's a great model which offers young people with enough experience to take their licence from 17. They wanted to get rid of that. The Greens continued their ideological campaign against SUVs and wanted a heavier vehicle category. But SUVs would have included e-vehicles with batteries, which would have been affected because of their weight. That came from the Greens. Also, they wanted to ban night driving and a speed limit to be introduced of 90 kilometres an hour for the 17-year-olds. But this would also have affected older people. 5-yearly testing, medical testing from the age of 70, all to be paid for. That's the typical Greens policy. They're fetishists of prohibition. They want to ban left, right and centre. They want to reduce right-thinking citizens to opinionless automatons, and these have all been deleted, thankfully.
Thank you very much. Mr. Deli is next.
Vielen Dank, Frau Präsidentin, poštovana gospođo
Amikor a ház elkezdte vitatni a bizottság,
when Parliament started debating this modification from the Commission of the directive, the objectives were laid out, for example, increase road safety and making the profession of driving more attractive to young people. We have a huge lack of drivers, and that was also amongst the objectives to reuse this. But as usually happens, it all went haywire. It all started with the new category of driving license, B1, this idea, and this caused such an uproar amongst citizens that it was quickly forgotten. And then now, a new idea about tractor drivers, which has nothing to do with increasing road safety. It just increases the burden on farmers, the financial and administrative burden on farmers. So it's oil on the fire. Now, these proposals are far from reality and make citizens think something is not right. We need changes in the European Parliament. Well, they will have the opportunity now to change things at the elections. Thank you.
Novak. Next speaker, Mr. Novak.
Spoštovana gospa komisarka, kolegice in kolegi.
Madam Commissioner, President, ladies and gentlemen, the mobility of EU citizens is very important, and therefore we need a harmonized driving license. We need to simplify administrative procedures to make life easier for our citizens. I agree with the changes we've made in terms of the weight of vehicles with a B driving license. I think that's important for mobility, for good quality of life for older citizens. It's important for disabled people and also for cross-border mobility. We should not forget road safety for drivers and for other road users. We're seeing things changing very quickly. We need new knowledge. That is why training drivers is very important, as well as health checks for drivers, especially for specific cases.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Dear Commissioner, I'm in favor of the zero deaths on the road vision. I'm also in favor of the unified driving license in the EU. But the question is how to achieve it. We have some statistical evidence as to the age group 18 to 24 who cause 3 to 4 times as many accidents as those who are older than 60-year-old. How were they trained? How did they undergo the medical checks? We are aging as a society, not only in Poland, in the whole of the EU. Millions of drivers were to be subjected to compulsory medical checkups. Will our health service be able to ensure this? I'm afraid not. Another problematic area, a vast area, are millions of people who don't have access to means of transport. We need to have a good strategy of public transport. But those compulsory medical checkups, it's not feasible. Thank you.
Dankeschön. Nächste Rednerin ist die Kollegin. Thank you very much. Next speaker is Mrs. Nachtigall.
Voorzitter.
Thank you, President. It really is quite a milestone in life to get a driving licence, but after there's all sorts of rules. Changes to the directive on driving licences are supposed to bring about less pressure in terms of red tape. Obviously, it's good that people can drive cars or trucks from the age of 17 without being accompanied. And this can cut red tape for lots of drivers. At the same time, this means it's possible that somebody could drive an electric delivery van up to 2.4 tons without having to invest in a very expensive C driving licence. Unfortunately, there are certain provisions in the directive concerning compulsory medical tests. This is going to put additional pressure on our doctors and health service. Let's think about it. We should look specifically at the medical, if we were to look specifically at the medical circumstances of each driver, that would be a much better choice. As far as I'm concerned, I think that in this way, with the pink card, we can ensure that we can have sustainable and safe drivers on the road. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Garot is the next speaker.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. Les automobilistes sont à nouveau.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Motorists again in the crosshairs of the Commission and ecologists. This report will have a direct impact on millions of drivers across the EU. The limitation of validity of driving licenses to 70, the obligation for medical examination reports, bans on certain pathologies, digital items are all discriminatory, freedom-killing and expensive for our citizens already under pressure by all sorts of taxes and levies. Technical checks on vehicles, you want one now on people. For us in Rassemblement National, there's no question of this, and you also want to impose nothing fewer than 8 new licenses for tractors, whereas our farmers are legitimately up in arms across Europe. What kind of disconnection from reality? Our French people no longer want any part of this. Let's reject the text.
Next speaker, Mr. Tobbe.
Fru talman,
President, it is very important to have a high level of road safety. It is good that we have harmonisation of driving licences in the EU, but we, as moderates, do not want to see things made more difficult for those driving tractors, for example. I think it's a shame that a lot of Swedish colleagues haven't properly gone into these arguments today. But we moderates have the EPP, our political group, behind us. We don't want to see the age limit changed for tractors. We are standing up for young people's possibilities to drive, not to have all this extra bureaucracy from the EU. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Mr. Bauza Diaz is next.
Muchas gracias, Presidenta.
Thank you, Madam President. Europeans are able to benefit from a single market and a Schengen area, which means we have free movement of people. This is an unprecedented achievement for our continent. When we're Europeans today, we currently aren't subject to a standardized uniform driving license at the European Union. As a result, the proposal which has been put forward is seen by the Transport Committee as a big step forward. This means that we could have a cross-border driving license which could be digital throughout Europe. This would be an enormous step forward when it comes to improving safety on European roads, to increase sanctions and have cross-border medical checks and so on. We'd also have a Europe-wide rule for novice drivers who would be able to have a driving license as from the age of 16. So this is enormously beneficial. All Europeans would be able to go and work in other member states, which for the time being don't have common standards for something as basic as a driving license. This is why, members, I think we should vote in favour of this measure so as to put an end to this Europe-wide anomaly. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Falca is the next speaker.
Madam President, ladies and gentlemen, the mission of an MEP is to find solutions, not to make things excessively difficult and deal with the problems faced by society. A big problem of the EU is the lack of professional bus and HGV drivers. The estimate is 500,000 too short. And in my country, we're missing about 30,000. Many of those professionals from my country are working in the rest of the EU in the West. This affects not just one specific sector, but huge sectors and the whole distribution chain at a time when we have important strategy and security issues around mobility. With youth employment growing, we need to break down the barriers to that profession without compromising road safety, and we need to attract people into this so that they are trained under professional supervision. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Ms. Katainen is next.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Improving road safety in the EU constantly is a must, and in that, the review of the directive on licenses is key. This piece of legislation affects a large part of EU citizens, and therefore it is important that the Parliament's position be well-balanced and rational. The rules can be harmonised insofar as it is rational, which is the case, for example, with the digital driving licence, but the Member States must also have room for manoeuvre and discretion regarding, for example, the compulsory medical examinations or the rules on category T and tractors. I would also like to raise the issue of young people's mobility in sparsely populated areas. In the outermost regions, there is no public transport available, so the light vehicles are the principal means of transport, which makes it possible to travel safely from home to school or hobbies and activities, for example. I am therefore happy to see that the light vehicles are included in the text, because young people's mobility in the countryside must be further improved.
Thank you very much. Next speaker is Mr. Arimont. Thank you very much, Madam President, Commissioner. We are looking at how we can keep or prolong a driving licence here. Now, I'm somebody who lives in a rural area, and there are two things that were particularly important or perhaps concerning in terms of the proposal. So restricting driving licences for old people over the age of 70. Now, in a small village, it's difficult. You have to drive to the bakery, to the doctor, to your friends. You can't just take public transport. So you're very dependent on having your driving license. So it's important there isn't an artificial limitation. So we have concerns about the compulsory medical checks, and we would vote against that. And then the second point is someone who lives on a border. When you have a tractor and a driving license for that tractor, if you cross the border, you could be stopped by a policeman saying that your driving license isn't valid across the border. The idea is to have a Europe-wide driving license for tractors so that we can limit this problem, or at very least have a mutual recognition of driving licenses for tractors, so that farmers who have to cross borders aren't going to be stopped by a policeman and sent back to their land because we don't have this recognition of the tractor driving licenses. Thank you. Thank you very much. Now we come to Catch the Eye. There are four speakers. We can take all of them, and Mrs. Grappini will be followed by Mr. Andrews.
Madam President, Commissioner, ladies and gentlemen, we are discussing something extremely important if you look at the statistics, and I know that we have very many road accidents, and it's perfectly expected that we come up with a proposal to improve road conditions. Now, people talk about the cost of medical visits every 15 years, and of course we cannot expose citizens to accidents just because we didn't want to do that check. With cars, we test them every 2 years. Now, I agree that we have a driver crisis in the EU, and of course we have this limit of 70 for lorry drivers, but our aim is 0 accidents. We have an internal market. If a member state already has a medical visit of a mandatory nature every 15 years, they may still be exposed to an accident in another member state where they don't have any medical examination requirement. And it's very strange that we just have a medical check at 70 and not a technical check. I think it's odd in an internal market.
We have Mr. Andrews followed by Mr. Olekas.
Yes, it's your turn. Thank you, Madam President. Already in 2024, Irish road deaths have almost exceeded the total number of deaths on the roads in 2019. The main causes are phone usage, speeding and not wearing seat belts. The police also say that all of the success in the campaign against driving while under the influence of alcohol has been wiped out by a huge increase in driving under the influence of drugs. I have read many analyses of this sudden and tragic increase in road deaths. Nowhere have I seen it suggested that a good way to tackle this would be by increasing the number of medical tests for older drivers. That is why I strongly welcome the renewed focus on updating the directive and was strongly opposed to the measure on medical tests and the validity of licences for older people. Let's look at penalties for speeding and mobile phone usage. Let's look at increased police presence, at speed limits and mandatory drug testing. Targeting older drivers is looking in the wrong place for the right answers. Thank you, Madam President.
Dankeschön. Es spricht nun der Kollege Olekas.
Thank you, Mr. Olekas, and Mr. Flego is last.
Thank you, President, Commissioner. I agree with many colleagues that our aim is to increase safety on the road, especially by focusing more on training of young drivers who only start their career as drivers. But I want to urge those who have doubts about medical checks. As a doctor and as a representative of a country where the medical check is compulsory, I can say that the benefit is twofold. First, we can help drivers to avoid medical problems because they go to these medical checks, and the medical institutions will not be overburdened if they look at the drivers who have no complaints. Secondly, the drivers who undergo medical checks and is checked will help to improve safety. I salute the digital driver's license, the introduction of the digital license. Thank you.
Redner ist der Kollege Flego.
Mr. Flego is next.
Hvala vam, poštovana gospođo predsjednice. Dakle, mi ovdje u Europskoj uniji nalazimo kompromise oko ove.
Thank you, Madam President. We often try to find compromises on a whole series of issues in the European Parliament. When it comes to road safety, however, my view is that we should not try to find a compromise. We clearly have an overriding priority, which is the directive, which is to improve and enhance road safety and to save the lives of young people. I would ask you to remember this. We cannot allow compromises to be negotiated, which might then enable young drivers of 17 to drive extremely powerful cars. Nor should we make any compromises when it comes to the alcohol levels in blood. It should be zero. If a man is elderly, that does not mean he is sick, but his doctor has to confirm that. Here, once again, we shouldn't enter into any grubby compromises to satisfy lobbies. We have to think about human lives. Road safety has to come first.
Mrs. Sucha has the floor for the Commission now.
Dear Chair, honourable members, I want to thank you for this interesting debate. I took note of all your comments and also questions, and please be reassured that I will convey all of them to the Commissioner Vălean. The debate shows that the views on the medical checks and the self-assessment are divergent. That is why in our Commission proposal, we left the final decision to the Member States. Our aim was to ensure road safety, but also allow members to also find the right balance to have this measure effective and proportionate. Following this exchange today, I am pleased to note that even though there are diverging opinions on certain issues, we all share two main goals of the Commission's proposal: to strengthen road safety and to facilitate free movement. I look forward to the vote where I hope Parliament will support our proposal. While the file will unfortunately not be concluding during this current mandate, I'm sure that the plenary vote will send out a strong and unequivocal message to citizens that our union is ready to work together to ensure that everyone can feel safe on our European roads. Thank you.
Dear colleagues, may I ask you, we have one final speaker. May I ask you for 2 more minutes of focus and concentration and a bit of silence in respect for the last speaker, which is the rapporteur, Karima Delli.
Mes chers collègues, beaucoup.
Dear colleagues, it seems a lot of people have not reread the text. There isn't a special driving license for SUVs, for example. Mr. Delli, you talked about a tractor driving license. That is not something I put in. That's the EPP, and I can guarantee there will be an amendment to delete, especially considering the situation we are in at the moment. To each one of you in this hemicycle, you just need one moment for your life to be upended or your whole family lives destroyed. Let me say to Pauline, to Florine, to Julienne, who are here, Monsieur Barrou, how dare you criticize this text? You weren't even there during the vote. You're one of these fictitious MEPs who exploits the pain of citizens. Say that to the face of the victims or the families. Now, drivers who are involved in these situations, they don't recover from that, and the families of the victims as well. You will see what they have to say to you. I think having this medical check on a regular basis, this is just common sense. A number of member states have put this in place already. We are sending out an important message that we want to save lives. In 20 years' time, we will look back at this measure and we will look back at this in the same way as when we had to introduce compulsory seatbelts. This isn't an issue anymore. And I think in 20 years, we will look back with pride that we had these compulsory medical visits, which will be adopted. It's like a second safety belt. This Parliament has one objective: to save lives. Thank you very much.
Vielen Dank. Die Aussprache ist damit geschlossen. Die Abstimmung.
Thank you very much. That closes the debate. The vote will take place tomorrow. We will suspend the meeting for a couple of minutes and we will begin with the votes at 12. Thank you.